Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H event space. Today we are talking about drones. You're tuned into elevating your point of view, photographing the landscape with drones. Huge thank you to Santa Fe Workshops and the man of the hour, Rick Berk, for joining us. Rick, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
Doing wonderful. I love drone stuff. We don't do enough of it here on the platform, admittedly. And so I can say on behalf of the entire team, we're excited to see what you're bringing us today. So I'm going to let you get to it and do your thing. I'll remind all of our viewers out there that if you do have any questions at all, we will be doing a short Q&A after Rick wraps up. So feel free to drop those questions into the chat on YouTube, and we will be dropping a couple links. Rick has some workshops coming up in the coming year, so we're going to be dropping those links as well as Rick discusses those. So, Rick, huge thank you once again. I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. We'll get right into this here. I'm going to share my screen and start my presentation. So, I first got into aerial photography, I guess you could say. About 15 years ago, I was in Alaska and I took a flight seeing tour on one of those bush planes over Denali, which really, kind of got me hungry to do more aerial stuff. So when drones started becoming more ubiquitous, it really ended up kind of catching my fancy a little bit. It took me a while to finally purchase a drone for a number of reasons, but I've had one for about the last year and a half now, and it's really added another element to my landscape photography. So I want to address a couple of different things about drones. First of all, why drones? Cheaper than hiring a helicopter or a plane, obviously, first of all, a lot more flexibility than a plane or a helicopter. You can go smaller places. Um, Easy change in perspective. You can access locations that just aren't accessible from the ground. I live on the coast of Maine. There's a lot of little lighthouses on islands that are just off the coast that you can't get to unless you have a kayak or a boat or something. So this makes it a little easier. And then, the main thing is probably just showing people things that they don't normally see them in that way. So it really catches the eye a little bit more because it's a unique point of view. So those are the reasons why I suddenly picked up a drone and decided to start working with one a lot more. The drone I use is the DJI Mini 4 Pro. It's got a lot of advantages. It's small and light, less than 250 grams with the regular battery. Great video, good still shooting features, good video features as well, though I use them a lot less than I use the still features. I'm not really a video guy. Um, the main reason why I picked the DJI Mini 4 Pro, I do a lot of hiking when I do my landscape photography, and it's small enough and light enough that I don't notice the weight when I add it to my camera bag, and it fits nicely in my camera bag. So it really is a good option for me. It's not as big as, say, the Mavic 3 or some of the other drones that are out there. I don't have to struggle to make room for it in my bag. So it works really well for me in that sense. It does have some limitations versus some of the bigger drones, but I don't find that they bother me all that much. So that's why I picked the Mini 4 Pro. As for if you're considering a drone and you haven't purchased one yet, you really have to, don't go by just what I say, but you really have to figure out what's best for you and your situation. Consider your level of experience with photography and also your level of technical expertise. Flying a drone is not easy. DJI and the other drone makers out there do make it as easy as possible, and it's not difficult to learn, but you really have to pay attention to what you're doing when you're flying a drone. You don't want to be distracted in any way. There's a lot to pay attention to. You also want to evaluate the type of imagery you want to make. Where will you be flying? Are you going to be hiking like I do? How much weight do you feel like carrying? Do you plan to print your work? Do you plan to just show it online, or are you going to be making video? Which camera is the best for you and meets your needs the best, and how much do you really want to spend on it? So those are the kinds of things you have to consider when purchasing a drone. And there are a bunch of options out there for you. So I feel like there's a drone for everybody at this point in time. So you don't really have to compromise all that much unless budget is tight and you can't afford as much drone as you'd like to afford. Legalities. This is where drone flying gets really complicated. This always comes up whenever people ask me about flying a drone. So I do want to talk about this a little bit. If you're a recreational flyer, You're required to, and this is all in the US. I don't know if we have viewers from outside of the US, but I live in the US, so I'm going to be speaking from a United States point of view. You're going to want to check the laws in your own country if you're from someplace else. But for recreational flying, the FAA has what's called the trust exam and a certificate that you get from that. This is really easy. It takes about 20 minutes and it's free to take the exam. Pilotinstitute.com has a good kind of trust prep program that doesn't cost anything and it takes you right through what you need to know for that certificate. Um, if the drone weighs more than 250 grams, it must be registered with the FAA. This is not as big a deal as it sounds like. It's only $5 to do that, and you can just go to FAA dronezone-access.faa.gov, and you can register your drone. Um, there's a maximum altitude of 400 feet above ground level from wherever you're flying, so that's your limit. The drone can be set to have that limit put in, so you'll never exceed your maximum altitude. You also must maintain visual line of sight, which means you have to be able to see the drone at all times, which can be difficult because they're not all that big. So the further away they get from you, the harder they are to see. And then also, if you're planning on flying in controlled airspace, you need to get authorization from the FAA to do that. That's easier than it sounds as well, but we'll get into that in a few minutes. If you're flying commercially, you are required in the US to have a Part 107 commercial drone license. This means that you have to pass a TSA background check and that the drone must be registered with the FAA regardless of weight. The max altitude is, again, 400 feet above ground level. You can fly over 400 feet with a Part 107 when you are above buildings in uncontrolled airspace. So the requirement is that you're in uncontrolled airspace and there's a building right there. The maximum drone weight you can fly commercially is 55 pounds. So some of those larger drones that you see being used in movies and things like that, you can fly. You again must maintain visual line of sight. Now, the key with visual line of sight is it must be unaided except for eyeglasses. So you can't be using binoculars to keep the drone within sight. The FAA is very specific about this. So it has to be with the naked eye, or if you wear glasses with your corrective glasses on. If you're flying in controlled airspace, again, you must get approval. If there are clouds in the sky, you must be 2,000 feet horizontally and 500 feet vertically from any clouds. Again, this is so that you can see the drone. You cannot fly from a moving vehicle except in sparsely populated areas. The FAA doesn't really define what sparsely populated means, but you get an idea. We all have a general idea of what sparsely populated means. You may fly over people in vehicles if you get prior approval from the FAA with any restrictions. That means things like propeller guards. The drone can't be too heavy, things like that. As for what constitutes commercial flying, the FAA defines commercial flying as anything that is done for business purposes. So I'm a landscape photographer. I sell my work as art. That counts for me. I have to have my Part 107. If you're a photographer flying for aerial portraits, you're a wedding photographer doing aerial shots over a wedding, things like that, or you're a real estate photographer doing real estate shots with a drone, that requires a Part 107 also. If you're doing surveyors, they need a Part 107 if they're doing surveys with drones. If you are a business using drones for educational or research purposes, you're not required to get a Part 107. So that's the big exception. Some restrictions for all pilots. National parks are a no-go. You're probably not going to get permission to fly from a national park if you want to. The one exception might be is if the National Park Service actually hires you to do the work for them. But you can apply for a permit. Your chances of getting them are not likely. State parks, most state parks, it's illegal to fly without approval. Some states do have an approval system in place so that you can apply. I know Washington State, they have a $25 application fee, and you have to apply like 30 days in advance to fly in Washington State parks. New York has a permit system in place. I'm not familiar with what the hoops that you have to jump through are, but I know there are some permits in place for New York. Otherwise, without that permit, it's illegal to fly in state parks in New York also. And then finally, it is illegal to fly over people or moving vehicles without a Category 1 drone or a waiver from the FAA. Currently, there is not a drone on the market that meets all the requirements of Category 1, so that's kind of a weird restriction there because there's no such thing as a Category 1 drone right now. Category 1 requires the drone have protected rotors, weighs less than 0.55 pounds, and weighs that with all the equipment in place. And then other drones, like I said, you'll need a waiver to be able to fly over people or moving vehicles. The waiver process is fairly extensive. There are a few places online that you can kind of get the step-by-step instructions on how to do that. So if that's a thing, you can do that. I know we see drones at like NFL stadiums at times. That's, the network's doing that. So they're obviously applying for waivers and such. Couple of helpful drone apps that I use and many others use as well. The big one for me is AirAware. The FAA used to have an app called Before You Fly. That's been replaced by AirAware in conjunction with Pilot Institute and a company called Aloft.ai. This shows you what kind of airspace you're currently in and alerts you to any restrictions in place, which is really helpful when you're flying and maybe you're not familiar with the area. It also allows you to apply for an immediate lank waiver to fly in restricted airspace. And this is what I was talking about, where it's not that hard to get a waiver to fly in controlled airspace. Part of it depends on what kind of controlled airspace it is, but you can simply apply for the lank waiver through the app and you can get immediate approval for certain spaces. One example of that is, for instance, Portland Head Lighthouse. I live in Maine, right on the coast. Portland Head Lighthouse is a favorite spot for a lot of photographers for obvious reasons. So this map here shows the airspace around Portland Headlight, and this kind of semicircle that you see in gray, that is Class C airspace because Portland Jetport is right nearby. You can see we're right on the edge of the airspace. Class C airspace around the jetport has a radius of 5 nautical miles, and it starts at ground level and goes up to 4,000 feet. So, within that airspace, you wouldn't be able to fly really, but you can apply for a lank waiver to allow you to fly up to 100 feet above ground level. And also, as you can see here, once I get out over the water, the restrictions are gone because I'm outside of that airspace now. So I can then fly up to 400 feet if I'd like to. So pressing this button here that says Get Lank allows me to go get the waiver approval and to fly at Portland Head Lighthouse and get some nice aerial shots of a historic lighthouse, which is really kind of cool. So that's using Aloft AirAware. It makes it really easy to get these waivers and to know where you are and make sure you're not breaking any laws. This is the DJI Go Fly app on the remote controller for my Mini 4 Pro. And you can see I'm at Portland Head Lighthouse here. And you can see it's telling me that Portland Jetport is right nearby and there's an altitude zone. Some of the information is a little bit different. You can see it's telling me I have 150 meters. I don't, I have 100 feet above ground level. So, be careful. I always default more to AirAware than I do to the warnings in the DJI app. You can also see it's telling me I'm in Class E airspace. That's not exactly accurate either. I'm in Class C. So you want to be aware of what you're doing and where you are. Another example with AirAware, I chose Yosemite National Park just because it's obvious. You can't fly here. It shows that there's an advisory in place and it says to review the advisories, and it'll tell you when you click on the advisory, Yosemite National Park and National Park Service Wilderness Area. And it says this is a wilderness area. Drone use and commercial and personal takeoff and landing is prohibited within all wilderness areas. So you're not going to be able to fly there unless you get a permit. Now, the kind of catch is that, if you could take off outside of the wilderness area and fly in, they're only talking about takeoff and landing within the national park. The problem is that you still have to maintain line of sight. So, really at the edges of a national park, maintaining line of sight, you're not going to see anything that you want to see anyway. So it's not really worth it. But that's kind of the catch to things. And just to show you what New York City looks like for those of you in New York City, look at all that red. You're not going to be able to fly in New York. There's a permitting system in place for New York that apparently is pretty extensive and pretty rigorous. Um, but this is telling me for the day that I took these screenshots, the president was in town. So you've got all kinds of restrictions. You're not going to be able to fly here. You've also got all these helipads, One Police Plaza. There's all the helipads down by the Hudson and East Rivers. So it's going to be tough to fly in New York City. We were discussing this before we got started here, and New York City is a frustrating place to try and fly. Um, Another city, though, Charleston, you can see Charleston is perfectly clear. There's a couple of that they remind you of. There's a couple of hospitals there that they want to let you know that there's a helipad at those hospitals that you got to be aware of, but there's no restrictions. I'm clear for takeoff in Charleston, which was nice. Nice historic city to go fly over. A lot of things to see. So it's not every city. It just New York happens to be incredibly busy, obviously. You do want to see down here at the bottom, you've got Fort Sumter, and then there's another fort that I cut off. Those are national historic sites. You're not allowed to take off or land in them. So you want to try and keep clear of them if you can. But overall, Charleston was clear. I had no issues flying in Charleston at all. The other app I use quite a bit is UAV Forecast, and this just gives the weather conditions for the location I'm flying in. It judges the weather based on the specific model of drone you have, which you enter in the settings, and then it lets you know whether or not it's safe to fly where you are. So it'll tell you a good, simple, good to fly, and it gives me the wind and the gusts and temperatures and everything like that, how much cloud cover there is. And here it says not good to fly, and it'll put in red exactly what the problem is. And in this case, the wind gusts are 22 miles per hour, which is right about the limits of the Mini 4 Pro. Mini 4 Pro max winds that it'll take are about 24 miles per hour. So it's getting towards the limit there. So that's why it's warning me that it's not good to fly. Um, Even 16 miles an hour makes it tough. Your drone battery will drain very quickly because it's using a lot more energy to try and stay on location where you've flown it and stay on course, fighting those winds than it would be on a calm day. So that's another thing you want to watch when it's windy like that is, how much battery you're using. The drone will warn you when it needs to return home because the battery's getting low. But and it's wise to listen to that. Actually, I've seen people not listen, thinking they had more time and they didn't, and it doesn't usually end well. So you want to pay attention to this. Just get an idea of what conditions you're flying in, because what's on the ground may be very different from what's 50 feet in the air, 100 feet in the air, etc. And again, just photographing with the drone, the pros and cons. The pros, obviously, unique perspectives. You can capture aerial shots that offer that different perspective that people don't usually see that make them more visually interesting. And then accessibility. You can get to areas that are difficult or impossible to reach on the ground, allowing for new and exciting opportunities in photography. The cons, obviously, you got to deal with the legal restrictions, the technical skill required to fly a drone. You have to be able to pay attention to what you're doing. The weather dependency, it can be frustrating when you're just itching to go out and fly, or you've taken a trip somewhere and you want to fly the drone and the weather's not cooperating with you. And then finally, image quality. And this is something I haven't mentioned yet. If you're used to a full frame sensor like on a Nikon Z8 or a Sony A7R4 or something, you're going to have to make the adjustment to using those smaller sensors. They generate a little bit more noise than we're used to on a full frame sensor. And the dynamic range is not what we're used to on the larger sensors in our regular cameras. So that's something that you kind of need to learn to work with, especially if you're doing some post-production on the images as well. So um, we'll talk a little bit more about that, but that's another big concern, a big thing to think about is that image quality change. Composing with drones, and this is the real fun part of things with the drones. The same rules apply as with conventional cameras, rule of thirds, leading lines, scale and depth, and all that fun stuff. But some other things to consider, obviously, just like with regular photography, late day or early morning lighting allows for the use of shadows as an element, which is really fun when you're 50 to 100 feet up in the air. Um, Consider shapes created by both natural and man-made elements. from the air, things tend to look very different. Obviously, colors, textures, patterns all work well, and unique perspectives on familiar objects. In this case, three lobster boats in a harbor. It's a little bit different than when you're on the ground. So a few more examples of those unique perspectives. This is a beach. It's about 15 minutes from my house here in Maine. Um, at low tide, it gets these beautiful little tidal pools with rippled sand. Um, at sunrise, it's a lot of fun because the light just rakes across that textured sand and gives you a lot of light and shadow to play with and have some fun with. One of the first things I did when I got my drone was I wanted to go photograph this at low tide so I could see what it looked like from above. And it was really kind of cool. It was a different perspective. It's fun enough on the ground to shoot that. This is from 159 feet in the air. Um, Really, all those sand ripples here now look very different. You get a lot of texture, a lot of patterns and shapes and things like that that are really different and fun to look at. This is from 305 feet in the air, same beach, a little bit of a different area, but it just creates, these abstract patterns that are a whole lot of fun to work with. I just have a blast going up and finding these kinds of things. Same beach again. This is still at low tide. There's a river that runs down and through the beach and out into the ocean. At low tide, the river kind of winds across the beach a little bit, and that's what this is here. This island is accessible at low tide. You could walk out to it on the sandbar if you want to. That's this right here. But from above, it has a completely different look and feel, which is a lot of fun to work with and show people in a different way. And then this is that same sandbar again from looking straight down, what we call a top-down shot, down onto the sandbar. You can see the waves on one side and the river on the other, and it just creates a really nice minimalistic abstract with just the different tones of sand and the water and everything. And these are the kinds of things that I look for when I go out and fly my drone. I'm looking for these unique shapes and patterns that I can use to create something a little bit different. Now, in the swamps of Louisiana, I'll be teaching a workshop here next week, and I have another one scheduled for next year at this time. But the swamps are amazing. You go out in a kayak and you can photograph the cypresses growing out of the water and everything. You got the Spanish moss. It's really cool looking just from water level. I did take my drone up there. And you get a different perspective, and again you get these patterns. The Spanish moss creates these patterns and these lines that are kind of fun to follow, the reflections, the green of the cypresses. It's really interesting to see, and to see it from this altitude is very different. Same with this one, a little more top down type of shot, but still it's a unique perspective on the swamps that not a lot of people get to see. This was in South Carolina, the ruins of an old church. From the ground, it's cool, but I really wanted to play with that light and shadow that you see coming through those empty windows there. And when you can get a couple 100 feet above, I think this maybe is only 50 feet actually, but you can see how now the light and shadow becomes a much stronger element in the image. Um, Coming through the trees and then coming through the ruins of the church really made it a lot more interesting shot than the ground level shot that I showed you. So that's something that I look for quite a bit as well. This is a pier, Folly Beach Pier in South Carolina, just south of Charleston. From the ground, it's nice. Another pier shot. It's pretty, but nothing spectacular really. You get up into the air, and now you've got this negative space to play with the ocean, a large green swath of water, and the sunrise in the sky. It becomes a little bit more interesting. This was a stitched panoramic, which is why the pier appears to be curved a little bit. I didn't bother correcting for this perspective because I could either have the pier straight or the horizon straight, and not both. Um, so that's the way I left it. But a top-down shot on the same pier becomes more geometric in style, and also a little bit more interesting than that ground level shot that you saw. So again, I'm always looking for these unique perspectives on these types of things. Here in Maine with the fishing harbors that are around. These are some of my favorite places to photograph. Also, you get shots like this with the dories that take the lobstermen out to their lobster boats. Um, Nice perspective at sunset from the dock itself. But going up in the air and getting an aerial view of that same harbor gives you a different point of view and a more unique perspective on things that most of the locals have never seen before. And if I want to get closer and do just the dock with some of the dories tied up, something like this now becomes a play on the different shapes, the rectangle of the dock and all the different little triangles of the dories makes for a real interesting play on things. So something like that gets real interesting. Trees are fun to play with the drones, depending on what kind of tree you're working with. This is at a boneyard beach in South Carolina. A lot of oaks that used to, be in a grove. The ocean eroded away and continued to encroach, and now the trees are on the beach, and at high tide they're in the water actually. So this was from the ground level, and then this is from an elevated perspective, just above, with the shadows playing more of a part in the composition of things. So a little bit of a unique perspective there. Fall foliage. This is actually right near my house, but just a top-down image on the different colored trees with some greens from the pines and some trees that haven't changed yet, as well as the typical yellows and oranges and reds that you see in a New England autumn day. So, there's a lot to work with in the landscape when you do this kind of thing, and it really makes for a fun time when you're up there with the drone with the purpose of making images. Maine in the spring, we always get inundated with these wildflowers, lupins. Um, they're all over the place by the side of the highway. They're everywhere. This happens to be a field further down east from me. It's a popular spot for photographers. Every photographer that I know in Maine has taken this shot. This is ground level. I decided to take my drone there, and this is about 20 feet in the air. And just that slight change in perspective to me makes it a much better shot. Um, the light's hitting a little bit different just because I changed the perspective and I get more of the barn at the top of the hill and more of that color in the drones. And those two pictures were taken within 15 minutes of each other, maybe not a long change, but that it's a big difference in the way things look from, when you can change your perspective like that. And then a top-down shot like this becomes a little more abstract and interesting. It almost looks like fireworks now. So, again, more options that I wouldn't have if all I had was my Sony A7R5 and a tripod because I couldn't get this perspective unless I suddenly grew wings. So, makes it interesting. One of the projects I've been working on since I got the drone, because it was one of the ideas that I had um, before I even purchased a drone, was that I wanted to photograph a lot of the small Maine coastal towns that I go through and that I really enjoy being in because they have such charm. That New England charm you hear about all the time in the travel guides. At least for me, it's real. So this is the town of Wells Beach down in southern Maine. Um, the beach itself is great. At high tide, you can't get on the beach because it's underwater. At low tide, there's tide pools and rocks and all kinds of things to kind of play around with photography wise. So one morning I went and I decided to photograph the town um, from the air at sunrise, which is what this is. And you can see there's a marsh behind the town, and then there's like a little causeway that goes back to the mainland a little bit. But really interesting perspective. So I've done a lot of these little panoramics of different towns to give me, start on my project. I think I'm about 7 or 8 towns in. There's a few more I still need to go through, but this is another one. This is my hometown of Bath, Maine. Now, we the town is known for building battleships or destroyers, and Bath Ironworks is right over here. And if you can see it big, there's I think 3 or 4 Aegis destroyers in port right there being worked on by the ironworkers there. So a different perspective on the town. This is another town, Wiscasset, Maine, voted by somebody or dubbed by somebody the prettiest village in Maine. hard to argue. It's a really cute place. If you've ever heard of Red's Eats, it's the home of Red's Eats. They're famous for their lobster rolls. But this is the project I've been working on, and without the drone, it would be a much different project. So uh, this is Damariscotta, which is also down near Wiscasset, another cute little town right up the river. If any of you have read the book, it was on the bestseller list, New York Times bestseller list, called Midcoast. This is where that book takes place. And this is Bar Harbor. If you've ever gone to Acadia, Bar Harbor is the gateway to Acadia. So this was a place that I decided to take my drone out to. You can't fly in Acadia National Park, obviously, but you can fly in Bar Harbor. I'm standing right on the pier, at the bottom left of the pier there, flying this to get this panoramic shot. You can see Cadillac Mountain behind and all the other areas of the park behind. But another part of that project working on small towns. Portraits are something I do portraits mostly in as a creative break from landscapes. I find when I'm feeling like I'm in a rut, I do portraits. So I have a bunch of friends who will model for me or pose for me. This is my friend Maisie, and she was gracious enough to get up at sunrise for me. So we did some shots on the beach, the typical, type of glamour beauty shots and stuff. But I asked her if she minded if I took the drone out. And so I got something like that instead. A little bit of just a different perspective on things. So it really gives you something else to do and to add to your repertoire as a photographer. This is also a drone shot. I just asked her to walk along the surf line, and I flew in front of her so that she could walk along, and I would just take shots of her as I was flying. Another friend of mine, we did a shot near a waterfall, and then I put the drone up and I got that of her, just again, something a little bit different. And this gives me a little bit different perspective also on her. So a lot of things that you can do that are that will add to what you can do with your regular camera. So like I said, it's really added to my creative abilities as a photographer, and I'm really enjoying the drone quite a bit. Composition tips. One of the things I've noticed is that you have to experiment with different altitudes. Sometimes you only need a little bit of height, like that field of flowers that I was only 20 feet off the ground for. And then sometimes you want more height, where, being 300 feet off the ground may be what you need, or 400 feet at your max might be what you need. So you really want to experiment a little bit with that. You want to watch for the separation of elements in your scene. From the air, sometimes objects will blend together. We were talking about this a little earlier as well. So you want to kind of fly around and find like clean backgrounds that you can use to place the object that's the subject of your image against a cleaner background so that it stands out more. Um, and like I said, fly around from all angles and pay attention to the lighting in the background so that you can get the best angle for that shot, rather than taking what you think might be the best angle. You want to be sure of it. And also what you might find is that when you're changing perspectives, you're changing angles, you're changing the altitude, you might find that you come away with several different usable shots that work very well for you, rather than just one or two. So something to bear in mind. The other big advantage I talked about was accessing the inaccessible with drones. So, like I said, there's a lot of lighthouses here in Maine that are just off the coast. This lighthouse is maybe 50 yards off the coast, but it's hard to walk there unless it's low tide. And even then, it's not really a great perspective when you're there. So, getting up high allows me to fly that and get a different angle on things. This lighthouse is Morris Island Lighthouse in South Carolina. It's not far off the coast. You can see the beach in the background there, but you can't really get to it because it's now underwater. It used to be part of the beach, and the ocean encroached. Global warming is real, so that's what happens. But you can't get to it now. So I flew the drone out there to get these photos of it. And this is what I mean by changing perspectives a little bit, a little higher, a little further back. Now you've kind of put it into more perspective. Um, this is another lighthouse, maybe a quarter mile off the coast in Maine from where I'm standing, but able to get really cool photo of the moon over it, and the clouds reflecting that nice sunrise light. Whereas I need a telephoto lens to see it really well from where I can stand, and it's not quite the same. Same thing with this lighthouse. This is right across from Portland Headlight, but you know, can't really get out there. It's a telephoto shot if you're standing on the shore. Um, I know guys who have taken boats out there and gotten perspectives there. I'm not lucky enough to have been on that boat at the time. So for me, the drone shot is the best way to get a different perspective on things. And then back to this lighthouse. This is that same lighthouse at the beginning of this section where I just flew out, nice little mist on the water in the background, which gives it a little more ethereal feel to things, but um, a different angle than what you could get on the ground otherwise. Entrance to a harbor up in near Acadia. Actually, this is Bernard or Bass Harbor. I'm on the land maybe 100 yards to the left of this boat, but uh, you know, um, getting the boat coming out of the harbor to go out and haul lobster traps, just a different shot, really tells a story. And these lobster shacks up near Pemaquid Point, you can't get this angle because it's over, you'd have to be over water or you'd have to be in the water to get it. So flying the drone there allows me to get this kind of an angle on it instead, which is a little bit different, a little more interesting, I think. I've always been frustrated by this spot because I couldn't stand exactly where I wanted to. Now with the drone, I can stand anywhere I want and get the different shots there. This is the same harbor and different spot, but getting the sun rising just at the entrance to the harbor with this lobster boat at anchor. Again, it tells a story. It shows the whole harbor, which is a little bit different. Nice 180-degree perspective on the panoramic, which is a cool tool that these drones all have. They all have the ability to do these panoramics, which is, again, a really nice addition to your creative palette when you're out there photographing. So it's something that I do a lot of. I will try panos. I will do single shots as well to make sure I'm covered if the pano doesn't work out well. But it really gives you something different. Then getting back into marshes, they're a pain. You end up getting wet or sloppy or muddy or whatever. Flying over the marsh then gives you this kind of perspective over these little waterways that kind of snake their way through and give you these abstract looking type images. Like this one. This one almost looks like the cross section of a cell under a microscope, but it's the marsh behind Wells Beach that I showed you earlier in the town shot. So again, something more unique. You'll notice again the low light creating these cast shadows that really plays across the grasses and the water and the little channels that run through, makes it more interesting. Over the tops of breaking waves, something a little bit more interesting than the usual at shore level photographing, doing maybe, a pan or just stopping the wave in action, going over the top of it again gives a little bit of a different look, something more, a little more unique than the usual shot. So fun to do and fun to see. Quick talk about photographing panos. We're really scratching the surface here, but I do want to talk about this a little bit. For 180-degree panos, I always look for some symmetry that can be used in the composition. Stuff on both sides that will hold interest and hopefully lead me to my subject matter. If symmetry is not an element, you might have to try some different sequences to get the positioning of your subject correct so that it works well for your image. You don't want to always rely on the drone's preview in camera. If you look at the playback of what the drone just captured, the drone will put together a preview of the pano, but you don't want to rely on that because I find that there's a lot of times where it has errors in stitching and also where it removes things that you thought you captured but aren't in that final pano the drone puts together. So what I do is I capture raw files with the drone when I'm doing these panos So I'll get the drone's preview image as well, and it's a nice reference to kind of know kind of what I've got. But I find that there's more information in the raw files that when I stitch in Photoshop, I can keep those elements that the drone maybe threw away. So it's a good idea to do both. You want to be willing to crop if necessary to complete your composition because the panoramics I find are inexact and will sometimes have a lot of wasted space. Um, and you want to eliminate that when you can. If you've never shot a pano with a drone before, when your camera is on the drone pointing straight ahead and is perfectly level, it's not pitched up or down or anything like that, that is going to be the center of your panoramic. So this is a 180-degree pano here that I'm showing you the 21 shots for. This is where the camera starts. It always starts in the dead center, and that's going to be the center of your panoramic. So you'll see here it takes 1, 2, and 3, and then it'll move over and go up and then down and then up again, and then it'll swing to the other side and go down and up and down and up. And this sequence takes maybe 30 seconds or so to finish, and then the drone will have the preview ready for you to look at also. Like I said, I always do my own stitching after the fact because the drone sometimes throws away some stuff. And this is the finished product of that particular panoramic. So something very worth playing with and learning to do. I find that the panoramics tend to be very interesting. Those of you familiar with Maine, this is Twin Lakes up near Mount Katahdin. Katahdin is right over here, and this is Mount Mary Jo, I think it's called, over here. So there's some key landmarks in the shot as well, which make it interesting for people who vacation up there or have camps up there. This again is that shot from New Harbor. This is another shot from that pier in South Carolina. This is a 180-degree pano, so you can see that on each side of the beach leading away from the pier kind of gives it a really different look to things than what we might expect, which is kind of cool. This is a waterfall on a river, up in northern Maine. 180-degree pano. Again, it creates a look of spaciousness that's really not there, but it's a very different look and makes it very interesting to see in this way. And then one last thing, I did mention image quality, and I wanted to mention dealing with noise and ways that you can deal with noise so that you're not necessarily afraid of it. I find a lot of people tend to get sketchy with noise before they learn to deal with it. So this was an image taken at ISO 1130, which is, high. It's not so high on a full frame camera, but it's high enough on a drone that you really see some noise. I use 3 different techniques depending on the image. Adobe Lightroom Camera Raw has AI denoise built in. Topaz Photo AI has really good noise reduction in the software. And then DxO Pure Raw is a really good noise reduction software that works on the raw files before you do any editing. So DxO Pure Raw tends to be my go-to first. Here is a 100% crop of the image. You can see how noisy and kind of how crunchy it is. It's not real pretty. It's going to need some work. Here's a quick comparison of those 3 images, of those 3 sections. This is with Adobe Lightroom, Camera Raw, AI denoise. And you can see here, there's some kind of weird artifacts going on in the sky up here that I'm not real thrilled with. Topaz Photo AI denoise did fine on the sky, but down here in the water, there's some funky stuff going on that I'm not real happy about. And this is DxO Pure Raw. There's a few little things going on in the water, but it's not as bad as the water here, and the sky is nice and clean, which is better than either of these two. So I ended up doing Pure Raw on the file first, and then going in to make my final edit, which comes out like that. So that's the best way I know of dealing with the noise. It's made me, knowing that I can get that kind of clean image out of DxO Pure Raw that I can go and edit the way I like to, has made me more confident in doing these low light situations with the drone. So it's not so much something that I worry about anymore. That's my very brief introduction to landscape photography with drones. I want to thank you guys all for coming out and listening. I'm happy to take questions now if there are any. These are my links here if you'd like to check me out on Facebook or Instagram or my website. Feel free to visit me. But we'll go back to Derek. Are there any questions?
Yeah, definitely. I just want to say, first of all, when you showed that red map of New York, I almost wanted to turn around, get my drone out, and prepare it for selling it online. And then you started showing your images, and I'm like, this is why I got a drone in the first place. I think it's so helpful to see. Not only are you're a great photographer, the befores
Thank
are
you.
supposed to look bad, Rick. The befores are supposed to be like, here's the before, no, and then it looks great. And it's like you're showing an image, like, wow, that's a great image. But yeah, it's taken to another level with the drone. So I just wanted to point all that out. Super inspiring from the perspective of a fellow drone owner who clearly isn't getting the most out of my drone like you are. But
Thank
I
you.
want to start with a question that we had one of our viewers, Visual Modulations, asking if you have tried the goggles for flying and capture, wondering if it is good for and useful for composition or is it just a gimmick?
I have not tried them. My son actually has a DJI Avata with the goggles, and he loves it. Here's the thing about them that I have questions about, and I don't know if it's ever been answered. Um, you need to maintain line of sight with your drone. If you have the goggles on, you don't have line of sight with your drone. So I feel like it's kind of, I don't know, on the fringes of maybe not being legal. I feel like you would need to have a spotter with you, keeping an eye on the drone standing next to you while you're wearing the goggles. So I've never played with it. I don't know if it would be helpful or not. I'm much more comfortable being able to look up from my controller and find my drone and see it from where I'm standing.
It's a great point. I didn't even think about that. I mean, technically, when you're going by the rule of law, technically, yeah, you don't really have line of sight. That's not a pair of glasses.
Right.
Technically, yeah. It's an
Yeah,
interesting.
I don't know what the legalities are. I've never seen it, the FAA comment on any of those the FPV goggles, but um to me it feels like I would have to have somebody with me who's watching the drone while I'm looking at the goggles. And I like to have awareness around me as well. Like, if I have my camera bag next to me and I'm flying the drone and I got the goggles on, someone could walk up next to me and just grab my bag and take off, and I don't want that either. So, it's to me it's too problematic.
Another great point. Look at that. One answer, two great points there. I kind of see both perspectives on that. Question. What are the issues, problems when editing drone images in photo software? Is there anything that really, I mean, you did discuss clearly just the sensor wise, and we're not working with the same sensors that most of us are used to working with. Is there anything else that presents an issue or a problem in post processing or with just with the image quality in general?
It's just mostly image quality in general. Like, for instance, if you're used to photographing, for instance, I have Sony A7R5s, which have like 14.8 stops of dynamic range. So, like, I could go photograph a sunrise, and I don't worry about blowing out the sunrise, and I don't worry about blocking up the shadows. I know that the information is in that file, and it's just a matter of playing around with the sliders to bring it out. When you're photographing with a drone, I don't know what the exact number of stops it can record is. I know it's a lot less than like an A7 or 5. My Mini 4 Pro does not have the dynamic range. The sun will blow it out very quickly on a sunrise or a sunset, or even midday. So it becomes a matter of learning how to work with that. And a lot of times I'll try to avoid having the sun directly in my shot. There's times where I do have it there, and I'll bracket a lot too, but the bracketing on like the Mini 4 Pro is not great either. It doesn't allow you to set up how far apart the stops are unless you're photographing manually, and or you do it manually and adjust the exposure compensation yourself. If you set it up for auto exposure bracketing, it just does three shots that are supposedly very different, and they're not that different. So it's a little frustrating there. But the main things for me are the noise in low light and then the dynamic range. You just have to be careful. I always kind of err on the side of making sure I don't clip highlights and I don't worry so much about the shadows going to what they're going to be. I just figure, okay, well, it's going to be a dramatic looking image then because I'll have dark shadows. But I try to minimize it as much as I can with exposure compensation, and I'll try and take a bunch of different exposures using the exposure compensation because, like I said, the bracketing, the auto bracketing feature is more or less worthless.
Interesting. So that's an interesting point. As far as the legality is concerned, drones, it's like they took off, pun not intended, but, and the popularity really just it jumped on and people didn't really understand. Everybody thought you could just go out and buy them and it's kind of like a toy. And then you start to see what they can do and you're like, wow, this thing's not a toy. Like it's fully capable of wreaking havoc, especially when if with the popularity. How
Mhm.
fast is that side of the industry advancing and like are we seeing a lot more laws come into play? Is the landscape changing as fast as it is for something like say AI, where the landscape seems to be shaping, reshaping every week or so? Is the drone
Um,
landscape changing that fast?
I feel like it's finally settling in more or less. The FAA has come up obviously in the last few years with a lot of regulations, the trust certificate, the Part 107 license for commercial flyers, things like that. Um, and now, just this year, actually, it became a requirement that all drones over, or all drones actually, have to have RID, where they're transmitting their ID over radio frequency so that the tower can see them, which that's now a requirement to have. And obviously, there's some people who don't like the idea that the government is watching them or whatever, but to me, it really is a big safety concern. I mean, if you fly into a plane or you're in a flight path and a plane flies into you, you could kill people, and
Yeah.
I mean that's not worth fooling around with. So, I try not to be that guy, and I try to follow the rules and um, do what I'm supposed to do because I don't want to ruin it for everybody else either. And I hope there's enough people out there that kind of feel the same way. But I feel like now with RID and the trust certificate and the Part 107, I feel like things are settling down and it's not so much Wild West anymore. And the main issue is I think education. People need to be educated on what's required so that they don't go out and just start flying without, taking the proper, instruction, I guess.
Yeah. And you did such a great job of breaking down not only just the rules, but the apps. I think that's a huge thing is we sometimes we get so caught up in the laws and the rules, and there are a lot of tools out there. It's like
Yeah.
everything else that the government is involved in. We think, oh, well, they just want, lock down everything and nobody have any fun and nobody do this. And it's like, well, you have to have it in place because again, there's a few bad apples are always going to spoil the bunch, but there are a lot of resources out there.
Yeah.
I wrote down UAV because I'm like, I hadn't heard of that app. And it's like, there are many times where I wanted to fly my drone out and I'm like, is it going to come back? I'm flying it into the ocean. It's kind of windy. I don't know what the temperature or what the wind speed is right now, but
Right.
stuff like that. There's a lot of resources out now. So it's, a huge thank you to you for bringing these resources to light for people who aren't so well versed in what's going on
Oh,
out there.
I'm happy to do it. I mean, I think Aloft AI with their Airware software is huge because to me, nobody's going to go out and consult aeronautical charts. They're a headache to look at. So, like, I mean, when you take the Part 107 course, you spend a lot of time on aeronautical charts. And they're confusing to look at. It's hard to read them. And the Part 107 test is very aeronautical chart heavy as well. So you kind of have to know them, but it's one of those things that if you're not looking at them every day, you're going to forget. Um, so AirAware does a really great job of letting you know, hey, you're here and this is what's going on around you, and these are the things you have to worry about. So that like if nobody paid attention in New York City, the chances of something bad happening are huge because um, between all the heliports and that corridor along the Hudson River and the East River corridor as well, there's so much air traffic going on that you could really cause a problem if you don't know what you're doing and you just take off because you feel like flying. No one's going to tell you what to do kind of thing. And then the other thing is if there's a wind gust and you're 500, 400 feet in the air or whatever, a wind gust blows you into a building, it's coming down on somebody probably.
My anxiety's peaking over here. I'm like, man, just watch. I'm like, this
That's
is.
why that's why I'm glad I live in Maine. I can go somewhere and not see people for miles and I'm happy.
I know. I'm looking at your pictures. I'm like, man, this is why I went out and got a drone in the first place. It's so peaceful, relaxing, and the views are so great. And then to think about flying a drone in New York City, it's like the
Yeah.
anxiety comes and gets me.
Yeah, I
We
hear you.
had a question from Margaret Ann joining us on YouTube. Any tips for handling dynamic range in Pano?
Um, the main thing would be again, adjust your exposure. You get a histogram on the app if you whether you have the controller with the screen in it or the controller where you use your phone as your screen. You can get a histogram on there so that you can see what your exposure is like. Um, so you want to pay close attention to that and make sure that you're not clipping anything. Um, Preferably on the highlight side, you want to make sure you keep that down within the histogram. Shadows, you might have to make a compromise on. But the other thing you can do is, and this is, gets into real advanced Photoshop stuff sometimes, is if you take the same panoramic, say 3 times, where you adjust the exposure compensation each time to get, one for the shadows, one for the highlights, and one that maybe is what the camera's meter says. With any luck, they'll stitch the same, and then you can kind of blend them together so that you get an image that captures it all. It's tough though. The larger sensors do a little bit better, like the Mavic 3 with that larger sensor than what the Mini 4 Pro has, does it a little bit better. But the Mavic 3 is a bigger drone to carry around, and for me, it's not something I want to make room for in my bag because it means probably leaving at least one lens home, and we all know how that feels. It's always going to be the lens we need that we leave at home. So.
Definitely. That's always the struggle. Final question that we'll get to here is a little more clarification on the RFID. Margaret Ann was asking, does the Mini 4 have RFID in general? So that's just to clarify, because I know there was a lot of ambiguity when they talk of that first came about, and there
Mhm.
people I think get it confused with the weight limit, and they're like, well, if it's under the weight limit, does it need RFID? So that's for everything, correct? Anything that's
The
going
the
up in the air.
RID is for everything. However, and I don't know if they fixed this. It's been a while since I bothered to look because I use the extended batteries anyway, which put me over the weight limit. Um, but because I have to register my drone anyway,
Mhm.
I'm flying commercial, so it doesn't matter for me one way or the other. But the enthusiast flyers who aren't 107 certified, they were up in arms because when DJI at one point had pushed out a firmware update that caused um, the drone to only transmit the RID when it had an extended battery in it, because then it became over the weight. But the weight doesn't matter for RID. The drone has to have RID regardless. The weight limit is only for registration requirements. So I think DJI fixed this in a later firmware update, but I know it was maybe 6 months ago after the RID became a requirement back in March. And then DJI pushed out an update probably in like April or May that made it so that the RID only went out when you had the extended battery in. And then I think another update fixed that. So, that's kind of the thing. But the RID is so the tower can see all of the air traffic. It can see the drone. If your drone is registered, then they'll know who you are. If it's not registered, then they won't know who you are exactly.
Perfect. A lot of information. This is a perfect segue to a comment we just got in. This was the best info that I have ever seen regarding drones and the photography with them. Thank you from one of our viewers, Sonia. And I think that's a perfect way to bring up Santa Fe workshops. I mean, Rick, you teach with Santa Fe, and Santa
Mhm.
Fe helped put this together. And this is exactly what you get. And this is why B&H partners with such institutions such as Santa Fe. It's the best out there that are educating. It's the experience, and you look at the resumes behind you guys, all of the instructors, and it's like you're getting the best that's out there.
Thank you. I will mention I didn't give you guys the link, but I do have a couple of Santa Fe workshops, online workshops coming up. One on using Fuji X series cameras in December, and one on using Nikon Z5, 6, and 7 cameras in December also. They're both online. I do deep dives into the system so that I can kind of demystify all those little settings and things that everyone's going, huh, what are those? So if anybody's interested in that, those are coming up in December. I'd love to see you.
Awesome. Well, we'll drop that link there. I know Fred behind the scenes has all your links. We got the Santa Fe links. This is like the perfect like appetizer to all those courses there. And Santa Fe, I mean, it's everything, right? It's in person, it's online. There's a little
Yep.
bit of stuff out there for everyone. Did you want to talk a little bit more about what you have going on next year in the way of workshops?
Yeah, I've got some Santa Fe stuff in December online. I just finished the workshop for Santa Fe up in Acadia National Park in October. I haven't talked to them about what's going on next year yet, but I'm sure I will sit down with them in the next couple of weeks and set up a plan for what I'm doing with them next year. For me personally, I have an Acadia National Park workshop in the spring in June of 2025. And I also am partnered with a friend of mine, Andy Crawford, down in Louisiana. And I'm teaching a workshop with him next week in the swamps down there. And I will be doing the same workshop next November with him also. We kayak out into the swamps, get up close to the cypresses, and photograph them from the kayaks. And then, there's a lot of wildlife, gators, and, eagles and hawks and different exotic birds and such that you don't see up here. So it's a fun workshop. It's really interesting. So if anybody wants to join me for that, that one's very limited. We only take, I think, 5 people on those. So you don't want to wait too long because we're limited to the number of kayaks that we have, and we don't want a big group because getting around in the kayaks to help everybody out is more difficult. So
Yeah, workshops that don't have a limited amount, it's like a red flag. It's like you
yeah,
want that intimate experience and you really want to
absolutely.
be able to.
Yeah, my Acadia workshop, I limit it to 8 people. So I don't. I think the Santa Fe one usually is limited to 10 or 12. But then when we get past 8 people, we always hire an assistant instructor as well. So there's it's like a one to at least 1 to 4 or 1 to 6 instructor to student ratio. So everybody gets good attention.
That's awesome. Well, Rick, look, like I said, this is a great precursor to all that you have going on. So I want to thank you for your time, your expertise, and bringing that to our viewers here at the event space. And of course, a huge thank you to all of our viewers out there who tune in on a daily basis, Monday through Thursday, hanging with us. So huge thank you to all of them. Of course, Santa Fe workshops for doing what you do. Same as us here. We love education. Feel like that's what makes the industry go around. So huge thank you to Rick, Santa Fe, all of our viewers out there. That is it. Another edition of the B&H Event Space now in the books. Catch y'all next time.